Today on Alex and Autos, we're out here in Georgetown, Texas, taking a look at the refreshed 2015 Chrysler 300. The model to my left right here, this red one, is the Chrysler 300S. It's the sportier version. And the version right over here is the top-of-the-line 300C Platinum. These two vehicles represent different ends of the Chrysler 300 spectrum. The 300 runs from the sporty to the luxury in this segment, and they also have the 300 Limited, which is the base model, V6 engine, rear-wheel drive, very unique entry in this segment. In my opinion, it's actually more of a premium vehicle than a full-size vehicle, although Chrysler disagrees with me. Chrysler views the competition for the 300 as a step up or a step across from something along the lines of a Toyota Avalon, a Ford Taurus, etc. They don't particularly view this as competition in the luxury or premium market. However, I think that that's a little bit wrong. I think that the Chrysler 300C, especially in this platinum trim that you're looking over there in the white, does extraordinarily well for itself against entries like the Lincoln MKS, the Cadillac XTS, the Volvo S80, and the Acura RLX especially. The front of the 300 has received a refresh for 2015, making it a little bit more aggressive and tying it in a little bit better with the rest of the Chrysler family. We have these bright headlamp modules right here. HIDs are optional. They also turn in the corners. If you get the S model, they're blacked out a little bit. Very well integrated front parking sensors and optional LED fog lamps that you'll find on most trims. In addition to the blacked out lamps, the 300S receives a few other subtle tweaks to the front. We have this grille that's sort of a version of the Chrysler winged logo repeated across the front end, and the Mobius strip at the bottom gets a dark treatment instead of the chrome treatment. Many people know that the Chrysler 300 was originally based on the Mercedes-Benz E-Class, but a lot of people don't realize that the 300 is considerably larger than that Mercedes. At 198 inches long, this is a very, very long sedan. It also has a 120-inch wheelbase. This is 8 inches longer than something like a Toyota Camry and 3 inches longer than something like a Toyota Avalon. Because the 300 is a rear-wheel drive vehicle or an all-wheel drive vehicle, you'll notice that this front wheel is positioned very close to the front of the vehicle. That gives it a very attractive overhang up front, and that also means that we have a much longer wheelbase to give you a better ride than you'd find in many of those front-wheel drive competitors. That long wheelbase really improves interior room. We get especially more rear passenger room right back here in the back seat than you find in the vast majority of the direct competitors to the 300. When you take a look at that ruler down there at the bottom of your screen, you'll notice this is about the same length as a BMW 7 Series. That would be the short wheelbase 7 Series. It's about 6 inches shorter than a Lincoln MKS. The rear of the 300 has also received a refresh for the 2015 model year. We have these new tail lamps right here. They have a circular theme, LED lamps right in the middle. We still have this definite bump right up here on top of the tail lamp module. It's a very attractive look, and it continues all the way across to the front of the vehicle, right down the headlamps. All 300 models get these trapezoidal exhaust tips, and if you opt for the optional rear parking sensors, they're very well integrated into the rear bumper. Most of the 300 models have the spoiler right here integrated into the trunk lid, but if you get the 300S, we get something a little bit different. The 300S gets this larger spoiler that's grafted right on top of the trunk. For 2015, all 300 models start with a V6 engine. It's the same 3.6-liter V6 engine in all 4 different trim levels, but if you get the S model, you get a little bit more power. The base model gets 292 horsepower and 260 pound-feet of torque. The S model gets 300 horsepower and 264 pound-feet of torque. In the S, C, and C Platinum models, you can opt for the 5.7-liter Hemi V8 engine that bumps power up to 363 horsepower and 394 pound-feet of torque. Both engines are mated to an 8-speed automatic transmission, sending power to the rear wheels. You can opt for a $2,500 optional all-wheel drive system on that 3.6-liter V6 engine. That all-wheel drive system features a front axle disconnect feature for maximum fuel economy and an active center differential with a variable torque split that is controlled by the car's computer. You'll notice 2 things missing for 2015. We no longer have an all-wheel drive system attached to the V8 engine. So if you do want all-wheel drive, you have to go with the V6 only. There's also no SRT model in the United States for the Chrysler 300. Certain world markets may maintain the Chrysler 300 SRT version because there will not be a Charger sold in those markets, but in the US market, if you want all that power, you're going to have to move over to the Dodge brand for the Charger SRT or the Charger Hellcat. Fuel economy comes in at 19 miles per gallon city, 31 highway for the V6 model in rear-wheel drive format, drops to 18.27 if you opt for the all-wheel drive system. The V8 comes in a little bit lower at 16 miles per gallon city, 25 highway, but it still has a cylinder deactivation system to help get you the best highway fuel economy possible with the V8 engine. Front seat comfort comes in at 9 out of 10 points. These are very comfortable front seats, and all the powerways are standard on the Chrysler 300, so even the Limited gets this 4-way adjustable lumbar support. Our particular model also has the memory-linked tilt telescopic steering column, and all the steering columns have a very large range of motion, so it's very easy to find a comfortable driving position. Our particular model also has the power adjustable pedals. Rear seat comfort comes in at 10 out of 10 points. Even though we have a little bit less headroom back here than in some of the competition, we have an awful lot more legroom, an awful lot more width, and more comfortable seats. That's despite the fact that this is a rear-wheel drive vehicle, and in general, rear-wheel drive vehicles are not as efficient on their interior volume for their exterior size. Now, one downside is that we do have this definitely large hump right here in the middle. This is larger of a hump than you'll find in those front-wheel drive vehicles. That does make this middle seat a little bit less comfortable. However, these outboard seats are very, very comfortable. Our particular model has the optional heated rear seats. We also have dedicated USB chargers back here, and this front seat was adjusted for a 6'5" passenger. I have about 4 inches of legroom. That legroom has improved for 2015 thanks to slightly thinner but not less comfortable front seat backs. The rear seats do fold almost completely flat with the cargo area. They do hang up a little bit right there, and this center passenger seat belt comes out of the parcel tray, not out of the seat backs. That does interfere with a little bit of cargo carrying capacity, but it is very handy in a large sedan like this. If we pull down the center armrest, we have 2 fixed cup holders, padded center armrest, and a storage cubby right there inside. Outboard rear seats get these fixed headrests. One thing to know is if you do put top tether anchors on your child seats, they will dig in on these headrests just a little bit. Moving across the rear, well, the first generation Chrysler 300 was well known for its use of very hard plastics. It's a very different story inside this Chrysler 300. You can see we have this honeycomb quilted leather right there on the doors. This also includes the rear doors, and then the upper portion of the doors on our up-end trim right here is leather, and you'll find this in the Platinum version. So that is sort of a navy blue leather right there. And this is also real wood trim running right across the rear door. The panoramic sunroof is optional in the Chrysler 300, and it comes right there above the rear passengers' heads. If we move right on up to the front of the car, you'll notice we have height adjustable seat belts for both the driver and the front passenger, and these very large two-way adjustable headrests. The premium leather in the Platinum model is also perforated because we get cooled seats. And you can see that that stitching and quilting pattern continues right there and then translates into vertical lines right there on the bottom of the seat. The premium theme continues up to the front doors. The armrest, the quilted portion in the ivory right there, as well as the upper portion, that's all leather. The only hard plastics you'll find are down here along the bottom, along the window switch area, and along the bottle holder. Over on the passenger side, we have large air vents, and we have a very large glove box, as you'd expect in a large sedan like this. Taking a look at the center console, you'll notice we have this infotainment cluster that is up front and center. It's very prominent in the dashboard. We have an analog clock there. And then we have very few buttons as we work our way down the center console. Taking a closer look at the center console, you'll notice the stitched leather going on right up here. 2 air vents on either side of this standard 8.4-inch touchscreen. This really separates it from the other more mass market entries in this segment where you don't get touchscreen navigation or infotainment systems standard. Now, navigation is not standard on the 300 on the base trim, but a lot of the trims do have it, and you can add it at any time after you've purchased the vehicle, which is also somewhat unique. Continuing down, we have the standard dual zone climate control. You'll also find buttons for the various safety systems as well as the radio system right here in the car. So the volume knob, tune knob right over there, also serves as the mute button, sport button, back button, park sensor disable, traction control disable, collision warning disable, and lane departure warning system disable button. Again, these depend on whether or not you have the options in the vehicle, but this dual zone climate control is standard. As part of the button reduction regime, you'll notice that if we click over here to climate right inside Uconnect, this is where you'll find all the various features that you may be looking for, like where does the air come out of the vents, what's my fan speed set to, how do I turn on my heated or cooled seats, heated steering wheel, rear sunshade, mirror dimmer, etc. If you want to know more about this infotainment system, go ahead and click that link at the bottom of your screen. You'll be taken on over to my latest review of this same Uconnect infotainment system. One thing to note is that for 2015, we have a few more apps integrated with the system. You'll find those right over here with Uconnect apps. We also have the ability to remote start the car from anywhere using a smartphone integrated app. Below the climate controls, we have a storage cubby with a 12-volt power outlet. You can put a smartphone in there if you need to. Behind that, we have 2 very large cup holders. They're heated and cooled in our particular model. The center armrest in the 300 is softly padded. It's also leather coated in all models. If we open that up, you will find a moderately sized center console. Because this is a rear-wheel drive vehicle, you'll find a little bit more room in some of those front-wheel drive competitors. This is where you'll find the 12-volt power outlet, as well as the auxiliary input, USB input, and SD card slot for that Uconnect system. One big change for 2015 is this all-new instrument cluster. It's themed after the one in the Chrysler 200. We have this tachometer right over here on the left, speedometer right over here on the right. Very thankfully, unlike the Chrysler 200, we don't have the labels that say tachometer and speedometer right down there below the display. Very much like that smaller sedan, we also have this 7-inch multi-information display right between the gauges. The multi-information display is controlled via this 5-way joystick button arrangement on the left side of the steering wheel, up, down, side to side, and OK. Taking a closer look at the multifunction display, we do have trip computer information right there, Sirius XM satellite radio information. You also get media player information if you had one connected, vehicle messages if there were any. We also have a digital speedometer readout, vehicle info that gives you tire pressure, coolant temperature, some additional gauges basically, transmission temperature, oil pressure, etc. We also have an oil life gauge and a battery voltage gauge. We can also move on down very similarly to the driver assist systems, see which ones are active and what they're doing on the vehicle. We get our fuel economy, average right there, instant fuel economy display as well as vehicle range. And we can move on down to our trip info. We get a trip computer A and trip computer B. Move on down, we're again at the audio screen. All 300 models use the same basic steering wheel, but there are variations in each model. We get a standard leather-wrapped steering wheel. We're in the top and platinum model, so we have this two-tone steering wheel with this silver strip that runs the circumference of the wheel right there. If you're in the regular 300C model, then you get a partial wood steering wheel. We have sport grips high up there on the steering wheel. It's all soft leather. This is that same 5-button module I showed you earlier. Dedicated phone hang-up, pickup buttons, voice command buttons. And then over here we have our cruise control buttons, radar cruise control buttons right down here on the bottom. Shift paddles on the back of the steering wheel, up on the right, down on the left. You'll also find the radio buttons for track up, down, and volume up, down on the back of the steering wheel. Over to the driver's left, we have more open pore wood trim, window switches right over there, seat memory buttons on the door, and your headlamp controls right there on the dash. When it comes to cargo capacity, the 300 may surprise you because in general, rear-wheel drive sedans are a little bit less efficient when it comes to interior packaging and cargo volume than front-wheel drive sedans, but the 300 actually beats almost every other entry in this segment with more than 15 cubic feet of trunk space. For reference, that is a little bit more cargo space than you'll get in a BMW 7 Series. If we lift up this cargo load floor, you'll find the vehicle's battery and a temporary spare tire right under there. Thanks to a generously sized trunk, that standard spare tire, grocery bag holders right over here, and a standard handle to help close the rear trunk lid, we score 10 out of 10 points in my exclusive Trunk Comfort Index. Tires have a big impact on ride and handling. Our particular C model has the 225 60R18 tires. 60 refers to the amount of rubber going on right up here. They do get a considerably lower profile in the optional wheels on the S and the C Platinum. In addition to that, you should know that this is a 4,000-pound vehicle and the base model has somewhat narrower tires, and of course the top end levels have really wide tires. So that really does cause a big difference between the ride and handling depending on what option you get in the vehicle. In general, the wider the tires and the narrower the rubber, the better the handling. We're out here in traffic in Austin, Texas, taking a look at the V6 version of the Chrysler 300. The 300 is a very easy car to drive and a very easy car to live with behind the wheel. Whether it's V6 or V8 or all-wheel drive, the 300 feels very confident, very connected to the road, even though we now have electric power steering in this 2015 model. The power steering effort is in theory adjustable right here from the Uconnect system. However, I didn't really notice that big of a difference between the 3 different levels. It's not quite as noticeable as the Hyundai and Kia models that allow you to vary that power steering with the button on their steering wheel. Out on these rough roads in Austin, Texas, the difference between the various versions of the wheels and tires is a bit more obvious. If you get the S model or the Platinum model with the top end wheel packages, we have a lot less cushion between you and the road, and it's definitely more noticeable. However, they do feel a little bit better in the corners. Likewise, with these 225 with 60 series tires, we have a more polished ride, but we do lose a decent amount of grip. Acceleration is excellent in the 300 thanks to this 8-speed automatic transmission. This is essentially the same 8-speed automatic that you find under the hood of Audi and BMW, Bentley and Rolls-Royce models, etc. This is a very, very competent and very quick shifting 8-speed automatic. For 2015, Chrysler altered the programming a little bit to make the shifts half the time that they were in the 2014 model, and that is noticeable when you shift the transmission into S mode. The shifts are definitely much faster. They're also a little bit harsher. They don't feel quite as refined, but that's really a trade-off that you get for those faster shifts. According to Chrysler, that means a reduction of about 0.2 of a second in 0 to 60 time. Of course, the V8 model is really the king in this category when it comes to acceleration, especially if we're talking about comparing this to the Ford Taurus or the Chevy Impala, because those vehicles don't have nearly as much power under the hood. Comparing with those front-wheel drive competitors may seem a little bit unfair because they have 6-speed automatic transmissions, and this has an 8-speed automatic transmission that gives this not only a taller final gear for better highway fuel economy, but also a lower first gear for better low-end acceleration. Acceleration, however, compares very well with the Hyundai Genesis as well as some of those turbocharged vehicles from the German competition that you may be thinking about comparing your Chrysler 300 with. Thanks to the rear-wheel drive drivetrain, this is much more fun to drive than something like a Toyota Avalon or a Kia Cadenza or a Hyundai Azera. This has an entirely different kind of dynamic out on the road. You don't get any torque steer, you get an awful lot better feel out on the road in terms of steering feel, as well as just in general driving dynamics. Surprisingly enough, we don't see the active noise cancellation in the Chrysler 300 that we recently got in the 2015 Jeep Grand Cherokee in top-level trims. So cabin noise comes in right about the same as every other entry in this near luxury to, I suppose you'd call it, mass market premium type competitor. So something like an Avalon again, the Cadenza, the Azera, the Impala, etc. They're all just about as quiet out on the road. Of course, I haven't had this vehicle at home, so I haven't been able to drive it on my usual roads or use my usual test equipment to evaluate this vehicle, so be sure and stay tuned for a complete review coming up at some point soon. However, I can say that without a doubt the Chrysler 300 has one of the highest polish levels of any vehicle anywhere near this price range. So I could very easily, with a straight face, compare this to something like a BMW 5 Series or Mercedes-Benz E-Class in terms of driving dynamics out on the road. This is, of course, a larger vehicle, so this will drive larger than those mid-size European rear-wheel drive competitors. So this will drive larger than something like a Cadillac CTS. Cadillac CTS feels very nimble, very lightweight in comparison out on the road, but this is a much larger vehicle. This is actually more similar in size to the Cadillac XTS than the Cadillac CTS. The biggest benefit, of course, to the Chrysler 300 is that you get all this rear-wheel drive dynamic, of course, all the luxury features going on the inside for a very good price. So let's move on over to pricing. Pricing for 2015 is relatively simple. A base limited V6 model will start at $31,395. Now that base limited model does come with an awful lot of standard features that you don't find in the competition, like standard leather seats and that standard 8.4-inch touchscreen infotainment system. You can add navigation to that base system either before or after you leave the dealer. That is also kind of a unique feature in this segment. If you want the V8 option, then you do have to move up to the 300S, and that will start at $34,895 with the V6. Add the V8 for $3,000. Now you can add all-wheel drive on any of the trim levels of Chrysler 300, even that base limited V6 model. If you want the Chrysler 300C, which we're taking a look at right here in this blue trim, that will set you back $37,895. If you want the top-end model, that would be the Platinum version, that will set you back $42,395. Again, you can add $3,000 for the V8 and $2,500 for the all-wheel drive. Now, as I mentioned earlier, all-wheel drive and the V8 is no longer an available combination. So if you want all-wheel drive, it's going to be V6 only. Competition for the 300 is very tricky because there really isn't anything like the 300 on the market except for perhaps that Chevy SS. But the Chevy SS is V8 only. It's also more powerful than any of the versions of the Chrysler 300 for the 2015 model year. In reality, if you want to compete with the Chevy SS in the Chrysler family, you'd be taking a look at the Dodge Charger. The Dodge Charger is still available in SRT or Hellcat version with just about the same amount of power as that Chevy SS or considerably more power. In Chrysler's competitive set, they were calling out things like the Ford Taurus as well as the Chevy Impala, but I actually don't think that that's the right competition for the 300 in my mind, because the Impala and the Ford Taurus start much lower than the 300. You don't get leather in the standard versions, and they're much less of a premium product even in the base form. Value is obviously what the 300 is all about, and that's really obvious when you take a look up the ladder. Something like a Hyundai Genesis starts $7,000 more than the base Chrysler 300. I think actually we get about the same kind of feature content inside the 300 as the Genesis. That makes this a very, very good value compared to the Hyundai. Of course, if you want a V8 in your Hyundai Genesis, that will set you back at least $51,500, and $51,000 is right about where the 300 stops. So the 300 is still an excellent value at the top of its trim. When compared to something like a Toyota Avalon, a Kia Cadenza, or a Hyundai Azera that are right in this segment, this compares very well feature for feature in terms of price. However, the 300 is by far the better handling vehicle. We also have a few standard features in this that you don't get in that competition. Comparing the 300 is tricky enough that when I did my own research against the Chrysler 300 and what I thought its competition should be, I ended up with completely different answers than what Chrysler actually thought I should be comparing it to. So I'm just going to go with what I thought it should be compared to. The Lincoln MKS is a little bit bigger than this, but it starts at $38,850. It's about $7,000 more than this. We actually get a few features in this that you don't get standard in that MKS, like that 8.4-inch color touchscreen. Well, you can get the MKS with a twin-turbo V6 engine. This V8 engine and the 8-speed automatic transmission is much more responsive. It's also much more of a dynamic vehicle than the MKS. Even though the MKS is longer, we get a little bit more trunk space, but not a whole lot more rear passenger accommodation. The same sort of comparison happens when you take a look at the Cadillac XTS. Of course, the Cadillac CTS could be compared with the Chrysler 300 because it is a rear-wheel drive vehicle, but that CTS is smaller than this. The XTS is about the same size in general as the Chrysler 300. We have a lot more rear passenger room in this as well as the XTS. But the XTS is considerably more expensive. It actually starts at $44,600, and that's an awful lot more than a base Chrysler 300 with not a whole lot of additional feature content. The XTS does have that very impressive LCD instrument cluster, but if you thought the delta between a base 300 and a base XTS was big, you should see the difference at the top end, where you get that as well as the twin-turbo V6 engine that doesn't really produce that much more horsepower than the V8 that's optional in this vehicle. Of course, the V8-powered Chrysler 300 is going to be rear-wheel drive. It's going to be much more dynamic out on the road, and I actually think that the interior is better in the Chrysler 300, especially in the top-end trims. You don't get a stitched leather dashboard, stitched leather doors, quilted leather anythings in that Cadillac XTS. The Chrysler 300 really crosses over between the mainstream segment and the near luxury segment, in my opinion. This really is somewhere in between, because we have the rear-wheel drive layout and luxury features on the inside that you normally find in a luxury vehicle, but it is still a Chrysler branded vehicle with a few hard plastics on the inside and of course a Chrysler logo and Chrysler brand and Chrysler warranties, Chrysler dealer experience baked into it as well. So this compares very well in my mind to something like a Volvo S80, which starts at $41,450, or even possibly a BMW 3 Series starting at $32,950. That BMW is of course rear-wheel drive, but this is actually larger than a 5 Series. It's actually more like 7 Series size, so if you're looking at that comparison, you need to keep in mind the 3 Series is $32,950. That starts about where this vehicle starts, but you're getting a vehicle that's much, much, much bigger. Acura's RLX comes to mind at $48,450 as far as a competitor to the top-end trims of the Chrysler 300. The 300 has real wood trim that you don't get in the US in the RLX. We also get a leather-stitched dashboard that you don't get in that RLX. Some very nice features on the inside. You'll also get more room in the back seats in this than you will in the Acura RLX, and in my opinion, a better driving experience and better passenger experience all the way around. Of course, now it makes sense to circle all the way back to the Impala, the Taurus, as well as the Avalon, because the Chrysler 300 really compares very well with them as well as the luxury set. It actually sets the 300 in a much better light, in my opinion, than if you only looked at the Taurus, the Impala, and the Avalon. This has a much nicer interior on the inside. It's also rear-wheel drive. It's much more fun to drive out on the road. We get the optional V8 engine. We get the 8-speed automatic transmission that you don't find in any of that competition. But we also have an interior and an exterior that can very easily be compared to vehicles costing $10,000 more than this, again, with a straight face. It's really no stretch to say this is a very good alternative to something like that Volvo S80 or the Cadillac XTS. If you're shopping even in the mid-size sedan category, looking at something like a fully loaded Fusion, Sonata, or even a Toyota Camry or Honda Accord, you do well to put a base Chrysler 300 on your list. It's a definite step up in the market, both in terms of room and in terms of driving ability and feature content. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. Again, I'm Alex Dykes, and if you want to know more about the Chrysler 300, stay tuned for a complete review on my channel coming up in the next few months. In the meantime, click that subscribe banner at the bottom of your screen. You'll be updated on all of my latest videos. You can also find me over at facebook.com/AlexandAutos, over at Twitter as AlexandAutos, and you can always email your questions to alex@alexandautos.com. I'll see you next week.